into many of the same issues. One of these issues is access to financial services. Regardless of how you feel about states' efforts to legalize marijuana, I'll say it again, regardless about how you feel about states' efforts to legalize marijuana, this bipartisan bill is necessary. It will make it safer for legal cannabis businesses and service providers to operate, to protect their workers first and foremost, and to operate in their communities. This committee held a hearing 5 months ago on the banking challenges of legal cannabis businesses and workers. We heard from Ms. Packer, a former, as members of both parties see in this committee, we focus on workers at as many hearings as possible, even with complexities of bank regulation. We heard from Ms. Packer, a former cannabis regulator, about the hurdles small cannabis businesses face when paying taxes in all cash in other regular business operations. Mr. Oyefeso recounted the dangers that members of his union, the United Food and Commercial Workers, face while working in businesses that are forced to operate in all cash. Employees become targets for violent robberies that, under the most devastating circumstances, can turn deadly. Cannabis workers also face challenges proving their income when trying to rent a home or apply for a mortgage. That's, again, the focus on workers. I want to thank our committee members for your staff's hard work on this legislation. At the hearing in May, I said I would not let legislation go through this committee that would weaken the regulators' ability to do their jobs. I again thank my staff for the work they did on that issue. My friend Senator Reid, to my immediate right, duly raised concerns about Section 10 of the previous Safe Banking Bill, a section that addressed deposit account terminations. Through bipartisan work, we've been able to find language that addresses both Republicans' and Democrats' concern. Just like the last markup the committee held for FEND, we passed it out 23-0. In Recoup, we passed it out 21-2. I remain committed to finding bipartisan paths forward. I want to thank Senator Scott and his staff for their work in preparing for the markup. Thanks to them. Even on topics where we disagree, it's important we're able to work together on this behalf of this whole committee. I look forward to sending this bipartisan legislation, voting it out today, and sending it to the Senate floor. Senator Daines.
Chairman Brown, thank you for convening the markup on this important legislation. I am not Ranking Member Scott, but I want to thank Ranking Member Scott and his team for facilitating this process, even though we may disagree on some of the policies. I want to start by saying that I am opposed to the legalization or decriminalization of marijuana. But the Safer Banking Act is not about that. It's not about that at all. It is not a step in that direction. This bill is about public safety first and foremost. The current all-cash model of legal cannabis businesses makes them targets for theft, for tax evasion, and for organized crime. The key to addressing this risk is by ensuring that all legal businesses have access to the banking system. Additionally, this bill tackles much-needed reforms with respect to financial account closures. The illegal Operation Choke Point initiative by the Obama administration targeted politically disfavored groups and attempted to drive them out of the banking system. This legislation takes an important step forward in ensuring that regulators never again have an opportunity to target any legal business, including gun manufacturers and distributors or energy companies, because of political differences. The full Senate and House will have an opportunity to make their own mark on this legislation and strengthen it as they see fit. That is regular order. I'm glad to see we had a hearing on this legislation, that we're having a markup on this legislation, and I look forward to working with every member to strengthen this bill and get it to the President's desk and sign into law. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Daines. We have a quorum. As I said earlier, we'll begin the executive session to consider 2860, the SAFER Act. If any members would like to speak generally about the bill, we ask you to wait until after the votes. There's at least one member on each side that needs to leave sooner for other committee obligations. I'd first call up Amendment Number 1, which I've offered. This amendment makes technical changes to the bills introduced. It also incorporates Brown Number 2, portions of Scott Number 30, as modified, Kramer Number 34, Sinema, Lummis, and Daines Number 35 is modified, and Sinema, Lummis, Daines number 36. With that, I ask the Brown amendment be adopted. Hearing no objection, the amendment's adopted. The bill is so modified. With that, would any member like to be recognized to discuss an amendment? Start on this side. Any member have an amendment?
Mr. Chair,
The senator from Georgia is recognized.
I'd like to be recorded as a no on that vote.
And Mr. Chair, I would like to be recorded as a no as well.
Okay.
As would I, Mr. Chair. I'd like to be recorded as a no.
Okay. Okay. So ordered. All right. Any members?
Chairman.
Okay.
Ranking Member Scott wants to record as a no, vote by proxy.
Proxy, okay. Any member like to be recognized to discuss their amendment? Senator from Idaho is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your recognizing me. I'd like to offer my only amendment, so I guess it's Crapo number 1. And this amendment deals with Operation Choke Point, Title 10 of this legislation. Everybody here knows that ever since the Obama administration started Operation Choke Point, I've been a strong opponent of it and have been trying to restrict the ability of our federal financial regulators from forcing banks or other financial institutions to basically debank companies for the sole reason that they did not favor the business that they were in. We've made some progress on that over the years, and Title 10 is addressed at this as well, but Title 10 does not get the job done. In fact, Mr. Chair, I understand that your amendment that we just adopted has some language to try to address this, and I don't believe it goes far enough or adequately deals with the issue. The problem here is that reputational risk, which is what this has become called in today's nomenclature, is something that financial regulators should not be able to utilize in order to debank or refuse to provide service to any company in any industry. If this Congress believes that some industry, like a gun industry, an energy industry, an auto dealer or an auto manufacturer who doesn't want to make electric cars, whoever it is that we feel is not an appropriate industry, that should be something that is managed in Congress and not otherwise. My amendment is really very straightforward. It simply says that any federal regulator cannot force or encourage or pressure a financial business, like a bank or any other financial entity, to refuse to provide service to a lawful entity. And the operative language here is very, very simple and clear. And what my amendment does is remove current Section 10 and replace it with this Section 10 that is very simple and straightforward. It simply provides that. Oh, by the way, I should say that I'm introducing this also on behalf of Senator Scott, who joins in the amendment. It simply provides that a financial regulator cannot force a bank or any other financial institution to cease doing business with a client or another business unless it shows or claims that that business is engaging in an unsafe or unsound practice, that it is violating a rule, law, regulation, or other condition imposed in writing due to the relationship of the depository institution with that specific customer, and then clarifies that for purposes of this section, reputational risk does not constitute either an unsafe or unsound practice, nor a violation of any rule, law, regulation, or other condition imposed in writing. Very simple. That you cannot force our financial institutions in this country to cease banking clients because their industry is disfavored. And I would encourage my colleagues to support the amendment.
Thanks, Senator Crapo. Senator Reed would like to respond, having put a lot of effort into Section 10.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This proposal by Senator Crapo is well-intentioned and thoughtful, and it parallels, in some sense, the original language of Section 10, but the effect would be to undermine the ability of regulators to effectively anticipate problems in banks and correct them before they cause harm to consumers, to the bank itself. I've worked, and I must thank Senator Daines, Senator Kramer, Senator Lummis for their help in perfecting what we think is a much better version of Section 10, which is in the bill. I also want to thank their staffs and recognize Zach Baum from my staff. But what we've done is we have provided the ability for regulators to effectively regulate, to not just react to things that have happened when the horse is literally out of the barn, but to go in there and anticipate. This amendment by Senator Crapo, although well-intentioned, would really impact dramatically and I think deleteriously regulators. And I think we should stay with the bipartisan agreement we have.
Mr. Chair, could I just
Senator
quickly
Crapo.
respond?
Of course.
Well, first of all, I understand that the language that we've got here was intended to accomplish what my language does accomplish. But let me just read from the language that has been adopted in the amendment. That language basically opens the door wide open to any kind of new, a loophole that you could pretty much drive any kind of truck through. It basically says that in order to force a bank to debank some other business in some other industry, that the agency must show that it has a reasonable cause to believe that this bank or financial entity is engaged in or is about to engage in an unsafe or unsound practice in conducting business. I'm okay with that. And then it goes on through a number of other things that can be utilized. And I'll just read a couple of them, which should show the size of this loophole. If it thinks that this bank is engaged in or is about to engage in any activity, conduct, or condition, a condition that could lead to or has led to the issuance of any number of concerns from the regulator. And then if that's not a big enough loophole, it says, or a supervisory recommendation. So if the bank will not follow a supervisor's recommendation on anything that it thinks might happen, then they can force it to debank an industry. And I just think that is far too broad a language. The language I'm suggesting just makes it crystal clear that reputational risk cannot be deemed to constitute an unsafe or unsound practice.
Thanks, Senator Crapo. I would add to Senator Reed's comments that Senator Kramer had reservations about this, or some disagreement, perhaps, with the original language, and we worked out language with him to close some of those loopholes. And I would reiterate, as I said at the outset, I won't allow the cannabis banking bill to be used as a vehicle to weaken regulators' ability to do their jobs. Clerk will call the roll on the amendment.
Mr. Chair, before we do that, real quick, I need to record Senators Kennedy and Tillis as voting no on the Brown number 1 technical changes.
I apologize for not incorporating that too. Clerk will call the roll on the Crapo amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Reed.
No.
Mr. Menendez.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tester. No. Mr. Warner. No. Ms. Warren.
No.
Mr. Van Hollen.
No.
Ms. Cortez Masto. Ms. Smith.
No by proxy.
Ms. Sinema. No. Mr. Warnock. No. Mr. Fetterman. Mr. Scott.
No by proxy.
Senator Fetterman again. I'm sorry. Senator Fetterman? No. Okay.
Okay. Mr. Scott.
No by proxy.
You want a yes by proxy?
Excuse me, he's going to be a yes by proxy.
Yes by proxy?
Yep.
Mr. Crapo.
Aye.
Mr. Rounds.
Aye.
Mr. Tillis.
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Hagerty.
I'm a yes.
Ms. Lummis.
No.
Mr. Vance. Yes. Mrs. Britt. Yes. Mr. Kramer. No. Mr. Daines.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 8 in favor, 15 opposed.
The Crapo amendment is defeated. Amendments on this side. The senator from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I call up amendment number 27. Mr. Chair, I am deeply troubled that we are voting on this bill at this time. And I must ask my colleagues why this bill and why now. I find a kind of tragic irony that we are calling this the Safer Banking Bill. And for me, it begs the question, who does this so-called Safer Banking Bill actually make safer? Certainly not the millions of Americans locked up for nonviolent drug offenses since President Nixon declared the war on drugs over 50 years ago. Certainly not their mothers or their fathers or daughters or their sons who have to live in hollowed-out communities filled with the shadows of loved ones who deserve the chance to thrive. Surely not the children who are waking up this morning without their mom or dad in the house because of the enforcement of cannabis over 50 years. Instead, this bill will make life safer for bankers, for businesses, and financial institutions, some of whom have been profiting from the cannabis industry illegally for years, which is ironic given many of the regular folks who illegally sold or used cannabis are sitting in jail cells right now. And so let me be very clear. I'm not opposed to easing or undoing federal restrictions around cannabis. And I would support all of the provisions and reforms in this legislation if paired with broader cannabis reforms that substantively address the issue of restorative justice. This bill does not do that. Some will say, well, we should not destroy the good in pursuit of the perfect. And I agree with that principle generally, but as I raise my objection, that is not what this is. This is not destroying the good in pursuit of the perfect. This bill, I would argue, will make things worse. It will set the terms for a step backwards in the pursuit of equity and justice and safety. We know what will happen in the cannabis industry if this bill passes. If we're honest, we know what will happen. We know that there are no provisions in this bill that suggest the cannabis industry will be any less consolidated than any others, or that the proceeds of this industry will be directed to the communities who have been most grievously harmed by the so-called war on drugs, which has in fact been a war on these communities. Since America declared a war on drugs, the United States of America, the land of the free, is the incarceration capital of the world. The U.S. prison population increased from under 250,000 in 1975 to over 1.4 million in 2019, over 2 million people after you include jails too. And many of these individuals had a drug offense listed as their most serious crime. So let me be clear. According to the facts, this burden does not fall evenly across our communities. While studies show that cannabis use among Americans across society, Black Americans and white Americans are around the same, Black Americans are nearly 4 times more likely than white Americans to be arrested. In fact, the incarceration rate is nearly 5 times as high as the white incarceration rate. And so we can't pretend that this didn't happen over the last 50 years. And even after individuals re-enter their communities, they are saddled with this criminal history, which can prevent them from accessing housing, jobs, food benefits, and sometimes a driver's license. I've seen this up close as a pastor, and it seems to me that if this committee is to take seriously addressing our nation's broken cannabis laws and to seek true equity, then I submit that our only legislative priority cannot just be to make this Safer Banking Act safer to protect financial institutions serving this new industry. We must look to make whole the communities across the country that have been hollowed out and are being hollowed out right now in real time by the war on drugs. My fear is that if we pass this legislation, if we greenlight this new industry and the fees and the profits to be made off of it without helping those communities, we will just make the comfortable more comfortable. And I see no historical evidence that suggests that when we do that, we'll go back and get those who are left behind. I don't believe in trickle-down economics, and I don't believe in trickle-down justice. If we allow the privileged to profit from conduct that deprive them of their freedom, and that in practice, if not by design, we will likely exacerbate the nation's already egregious racial wealth gap. And so that's my concern. This is why I'm offering a simple, common sense amendment to this legislation that would establish a 5-year sunset on these policies unless we demonstrate that they have actually made life better for the millions of families and the communities being harmed right now by the war on drugs. Surely they deserve to benefit from this committee's work on this issue as much as wealthy cannabis investors. I've heard a lot from my colleagues about how this bill will help small businesses, how it will help entrepreneurs and help those harmed from decades of injustice. And if we sincerely believe that, we ought to hold ourselves accountable to that goal. And if you sincerely believe that, and that this will narrow the racial wealth gap and not expand it, as I fear it will, you should vote yes on this amendment. Hold ourselves accountable. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I ask for a roll call vote on my amendment.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. I want to compliment you in calling attention, as you have so well in your 2.5 years in the Senate, namely the way our drug laws impact America's diverse communities especially. I support the goals of the amendment. I want to find targeted ways to achieve them. However, I must oppose the amendment because it would create an extended period of uncertainty for small financial institutions and small bankers and small businesses. I look forward to working with colleagues in ways to make sure this bill is implemented with equity in mind, with a view to countering some of the effects that our country's drug policies have had on our communities. This amendment, in my mind, is not the right way or the right time to do that. Senator Warren is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm supporting the underlying bill because I think it's common sense policy to make sure that marijuana businesses that are legal under state law can access bank accounts and other financial services. I also think the bill is a good step in the right direction to make federal cannabis law a little less out of touch with the reality on the ground in states across this country. But I agree with the concerns that Senator Warnock is raising today. This bill does little or nothing to address the harms of marijuana criminalization, particularly for Black and brown communities. Today, 1/3 of drug possession arrests are for marijuana possession. And as Senator Warnock noted, Black Americans are almost 4 times more likely than white Americans to be arrested for marijuana possession. Meanwhile, those communities most harmed by the criminalization of marijuana are last in line to profit from its legalization. Marijuana sales are estimated to reach over $31 billion this year. The marijuana business owners who will profit from those sales are 80% white. Fewer than 5% are Black. And if we're not careful, we'll see massive cannabis operations dominate the market and drive out the small minority-owned operators that exist. I share Senator Warnock's concern that this bill may reinforce inequities by helping white-owned cannabis businesses grow their profits while Black and brown people are still being arrested for simple marijuana possession. That means that this bill cannot be all that we do in this Congress on marijuana. I am glad that Leader Schumer has committed to bring the HOPE Act alongside this bill to support expungement of marijuana convictions at the state and local level. That will be an important step. But there are other things that we can do. For example, Senator Warnock has championed a provision establishing that no financial institution may deny services to an applicant based solely on a prior conviction for nonviolent cannabis offense. Even if that language can't be included in this bill, FinCEN should act now to update its 2014 red flags guidance to make sure that banks that a business owner's past cannabis conviction is no reason to deny current financial services. Ultimately, we need to remove marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act altogether. It makes no sense that marijuana remains a Schedule I drug while the state legal marijuana industry is booming. The communities that have borne the brunt of marijuana's criminalization for decades should not be left behind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Van Hollen's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Warren covered a lot of what I plan to say, so I'm going to sum this up by saying that I do think that this bill is an important step forward in eliminating the cash economy and all the risks and burdens that comes with that in an area that is legal in many states, including my state of Maryland. But I do also share Senator Warnock's strong views on this. If this committee had jurisdiction over criminal justice matters, I would not vote today to move it forward without a vote on those issues. The HOPE Act is something that Senator Schumer has committed to have a vote on the floor, and I do think while I will support moving this bill out of this committee, how I look at it going forward on the floor will depend on both the opportunity to vote on those matters and whether we address those matters. Finally, because marijuana is still a Schedule I drug, and I think we should change that. I voted in the past to change that. The federal government really has not moved forward in the area of health regulations. And whether it's FDA or others, in my view, I think it's really important that the federal government take a close look at the question of the health impacts over time of marijuana. So for those reasons, I have the view that we need to deal with this in a more comprehensive manner, but this committee's jurisdiction is what it is, and that's why I will support this bill today.
Senator Warnock is recognized to close.
Thank you, Chairman Brown. Respectfully, I think the question of jurisdiction, these kinds of issues come up all the time. We are debating this bill right now. And so we have the ability to advance racial justice and not increase the racial wealth gap. I think that's the choice in front of us right now. And I think that often we wonder why these issues seem so intractable. And I think we're witnessing in real time how this happens. Good people, and I mean that, regarding my colleagues who are here and who are committed to this work. I think these are the kinds of procedural issues that leave us stymied around this very question. I hope I'm wrong, that this will not increase the racial wealth gap. I think I'm right about that. And I think if we are genuinely committed to that concern, then we ought to adopt my amendment and hold ourselves accountable to the work that we say we want to do.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. The clerk will call the roll on the Warnock amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Reed.
No.
Mr. Menendez.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tester. No. Mr. Warner. No. Ms. Warren.
Yes.
Mr. Van Hollen.
Yes.
Ms. Cortez Masto.
No.
Ms. Smith.
No by proxy.
Ms. Sinema.
No.
Mr. Warnock.
Yes.
Mr. Fetterman. Mr. Scott.
No by proxy.
Mr. Crapo.
No.
Mr. Rounds.
No.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hagerty.
No.
Ms. Lummis.
No.
Mr. Vance. No. Mrs. Britt. No. Mr. Kramer.
No.
Mr. Daines.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 3 in favor and 20 opposed.
Thank you. The amendment is defeated. Any member wishing to
Mr.
offer
Chairman.
additional amendment, Senator Rounds?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move to call up amendment number 32. To me, this legislation we're debating today is fundamentally flawed. If it were to become law, the bill would give special protections to businesses conducting a federally illicit activity, protections that legal businesses simply do not enjoy. Further, these businesses will retain these enhanced protections if federal laws were to change. That means that cannabis businesses will forever be considered a protected industry, an industry where banks enjoy substantive immunity from regulations. Meanwhile, legal industries such as firearms or traditional fuel sources still must fight to even hold accounts. My amendment is simple. This act will sunset if cannabis is rescheduled so that the marijuana industry and their banks are not immune from the requirements every other industry has to face. In all due respect to my colleagues, this legislation, I believe, really is opening up a can of worms. I can't support the legislation, though, that you've laid out before us, and I think that this particular amendment, even with it included, is still not enough to make it acceptable to me, and so rather than messing with your proposal, I intend to withdraw this amendment at this time. I can't support the legislation with or without the amendment, so I will withdraw it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else an amendment before final passage?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hagerty.
I'd like to offer Hagerty Amendment 29. That amendment would prevent the laundering of fentanyl and methamphetamine proceeds via marijuana sales.
Thank you.
As reported this summer, there are a number of marijuana operations in the United States that are being financed by cartels. These are linked to illicit drug smuggling and human trafficking. This amendment would help address the major loophole, and I encourage my colleagues to support it.
Thank you, Senator Hagerty. The amendment's not germane. It focuses on legal processes and legal consequences for specific criminal activities when it's within judiciary's jurisdiction. We've been informed, we've confirmed with the Senate parliamentarian. It's not germane. Senator Daines.
Yeah, I want to thank Senator Hagerty for offering this amendment. Look, in Montana, we've got a severe issue with illicit fentanyl and meth. It's a big problem, not only in my state, but of course, I think every state represented here at this dais. While the parliamentarian has ruled this as not germane to the committee, I do look forward to working with Senator Hagerty on this when this bill comes to the floor.
Well, I request to be recognized, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hagerty.
This amendment is germane to the Safer Banking Bill. This bill, among other things, shields marijuana proceeds from the money laundering provisions and allows depository institutions to transact marijuana proceeds. The proposed amendment creates civil penalties for anyone in the marijuana supply chain who commingles fentanyl or methamphetamine proceeds with state-sanctioned marijuana proceeds. These civil penalties are germane to safer banking because they support the stated intent of the bill, allowing state-sanctioned marijuana proceeds to be transacted, deposited in banks, by helping to ensure that only state-sanctioned marijuana proceeds are transacted with depository institutions. Finally, the Safer Banking Bill already implicates the Department of Justice. Section 13 requires the Comptroller General to consult with the AG to prevent suspicious transactions by individuals or organizations. This gets directly at this concern. I'd like to make clear what's happening today. Chairman Brown is attempting to prevent a vote from occurring and for this committee to decide the fate of the amendment, rather than allowing a vote to happen to try to defeat it on its merits. So I want to move to appeal the ruling of the chair and request a roll call vote.
I share the concern Senator Hagerty has about fentanyl and appreciate his support in the FEND Act, which this committee passed. The sitting ranking member and I believe this is non-germane. The amendment's out of order. The chair repeals the Senator Hagerty asked for a ruling of the chair, a vote of the committee, so the vote's ordered. The question is upholding the rule of the chair.
Vote is on the overturning the rule.
Overturning. Yeah. So the vote is on overturning the rule of the chair. So a yes means overturning, a no is the position the ranking member and I are taking.
Okay. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Reed?
No?
Mr. Menendez?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tester? No. Mr. Warner? No. Ms. Warren? No. Mr. Van Hollen? No. Ms. Cortez Masto? No. Ms. Smith?
No, it's a yes to support.
No by proxy.
Ms. Sinema? Mr. Warnock?
No.
Mr. Fetterman?
No.
Mr. Scott?
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Crapo? Aye. Mr. Rounds? Aye. Mr. Tillis?
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Hagerty?
Yes.
Ms. Lummis?
Aye.
Mr. Vance? Mrs. Britt? Mr. Kramer? Mr. Daines?
No.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 13 to 10.
The chair's motion is the chair's ruling is upheld. The amendment is non-germane and ruled out of order.
Mr. Chair, I seek to be recognized.
Senator Sinema is recognized first.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, while I voted to uphold the ruling of the chair because of the rules in the committee today, I would like to just note that I share Mr. Hagerty's concern, and I appreciate the underlying substance of his amendment, and I'd love to work with him on perhaps creating a floor amendment that we can address this issue when the bill comes to the floor. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate what you're doing, and I'd like to work together on it. Thanks.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Hagerty.
I appreciate your comment, Senator Sinema. This is a very real concern. These cartels are moving fentanyl and methamphetamine right alongside marijuana sales, and there's a loophole in this law. I'm shocked that this committee is willing to let this go through. This is supporting fentanyl and methamphetamine sales. This is an easy fix. I'm shocked at the result here.
Any amendments?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Senator Cortez.
I just need to respond to that as well. Of course, I have concerns. I think we all have concerns about the movement of fentanyl in and across the country, and including any type of money laundering and illicit gains. But let me just make something very clear. This legislation does not open a loophole. It is already illegal to commingle any of those funds, particularly their fentanyl. There are ways for law enforcement to follow that money, to already hold them illegal. This legislation is very narrow when it comes to legitimate marijuana businesses, and there is oversight with respect to the Banking Act, the Bank Secrecy Act, and law enforcement. So listen, if you believe that there is still an issue that law enforcement cannot track this money and track those transnational organized crime and follow the money when it comes to fentanyl and other illicit drugs, I'll work with you on that. I will absolutely work with you on the language to make sure that law enforcement has the tools that they need that you're claiming they will not have, because I do believe it is concern for everybody in this room who is dealing with fentanyl across the country. So I thank you for the opportunity.
Any other senators wish to offer amendments? In terms of comments about the bill, I would ask you to wait till the final vote, and then I'll stay around. Senator Merkley wants to speak to the committee too.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like
Do you have an amendment to offer?
I don't have an amendment.
I would like to ask you to wait till after I've left.
I've sat here and listened to people exceed the time
I've let you
limit.
speak 3 times. There are members, Senator Rounds, Senator Tester, testifying in other committees. You can stay till after the vote and make your comments there.
I have an amendment to offer, Mr. Chair.
Senator Warnock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I call up amendment number 19. This amendment would require the Government Accountability Office to conduct a study. A study, should the Safer Banking Act become law, on the racial wealth gap and the percentage of minority-owned cannabis-related businesses before and after passage of the Safer Banking Act. This amendment, again, is about accountability. It's about ensuring that we are keeping our promise to use this bill to narrow the racial wealth gap and to undo the immeasurable harm that the war on drugs has done to communities of color. If the legal cannabis economy is dominated by a few major power players, while excluding small businesses owned by minorities and members of those very communities that have faced the most negative repercussions from the war on drugs, we will only exacerbate racial disparities and broaden the racial wealth gap rather than narrowing it. We must ensure that this bill is truly helping small businesses and entrepreneurs from communities that were harmed the most by the criminalization of cannabis, and that it is actively working to counteract that harm. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on my common sense amendment that will help us remain accountable to the goals we have outlined for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I ask for a roll call on my amendment.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. This amendment is out of order because the filing of the amendment did not meet the committee's requirements.
I'd like to vote on an appeal. I ask for a vote to overturn the chair's ruling.
Clerk will call the roll. A yes vote means overturn the chair's ruling.
Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Reed,
No?
Mr. Menendez,
No by proxy.
Mr. Tester, Mr. Warner, Ms. Warren, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Van Hollen, Ms. Cortez Masto, Ms. Smith,
No by proxy.
Ms. Sinema,
No.
Mr. Warnock,
Yes.
Mr. Fetterman, Mr. Scott,
No by proxy.
Mr. Crapo,
No.
Mr. Rounds,
No.
Mr. Tillis,
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy,
No by proxy.
Mr. Hagerty,
I'm a yes.
Ms. Lummis,
No.
Mr. Vance, Mrs. Brett, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Daines.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 3 in favor and 20 opposed.
Chair's ruling stands. I now move the committee favorably report S-2860, the Safer Banking Act, as amended. The clerk will call the roll on final passage.
Mr. Chair,
Aye.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to call up an amendment.
The amendment has been called, the roll call has begun. I apologize, I'm sorry. I had already called the bill up for final passage. I asked if there were amendments, and there were not. We're in the middle of the roll call.
Okay. Mr. Chairman,
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye.
Mr. Menendez,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tester, Mr. Warner,
Don't get up on my behalf.
Ms. Warren, Mr. Van Hollen, Ms. Cortez Masto, Ms. Smith,
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Sinema,
Aye.
Mr. Warnock,
No.
Mr. Fetterman, Mr. Scott,
No by proxy.
Mr. Crapo,
No.
Mr. Rounds,
No.
Mr. Tillis,
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy,
No.
Mr. Hagerty,
No.
Ms. Lummis,
Aye.
Mr. Vance, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Daines.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 14 in favor, 9 opposed.
With this vote, the bill is amended. It's hereby ordered favorably reported to the full Senate. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes, that the Gordon rule be waived. Hearing no objection, it's ordered. I want to thank you all again.
Mr. Chair,
The senator.
I'd like to be
Georgia.
recorded as a no.
Okay. Let's do a voice vote. All in favor of the staff being allowed to make technical and conforming changes?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask for a roll call vote.
Clerk will call the roll. We're voting on, I ask unanimous consent the staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes. Senator Warnock objected, so we will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman,
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye.
Mr. Menendez,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tester, Mr. Warner, Ms. Warren, Mr. Van Hollen, Ms. Cortez Masto, Ms. Smith,
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Sinema,
Aye.
Mr. Warnock,
No.
Mr. Fetterman,
Aye.
Mr. Scott,
Aye by proxy. Aye by proxy.
Mr. Crapo,
Aye.
Mr. Rounds,
Aye.
Mr. Tillis,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Hagerty,
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Lummis,
Aye.
Mr. Vance, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Daines.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 22-1.
The staff is allowed to make technical conforming changes. Thank you all again for the hard work. Any members that wish to make any statements before the executive session is concluded on either side? Senator Lummis wants to begin. Again, these are the markup is concluded. I will sit and stay and listen to any members. I'll start with Senator Lummis and go back and forth by seniority. On our side, thank you very much for being here. And then Senator Merkley wants to make a few comments before we adjourn. Senator Kennedy? I will stay as long as anybody but the senator from Louisiana wants to talk. I hear him often, always going over his 5-minute limit. Because you look at the world so similarly. Senator Lummis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will not make a similar pledge with regard to the remarks from the senator from Louisiana, but I appreciate his ability to speak. Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Ranking Member Tim Scott for holding a markup on this legislation. I also want to thank my friends Senator Daines, Sinema, and Kramer for working hard to advance this legislation. It's an example of how member-driven priorities and regular order can still carry the day in the Senate, and I hope we have many more markups in the years to come. I want to lay out my reasons for supporting this bill. First of all, marijuana is not legal in Wyoming in any form, in recreation or in medical marijuana, and I like the way Wyoming is now. I don't support legalization of marijuana. But the voters in many states, including Montana and Colorado, my neighbors to the north and south, have voted to legalize marijuana. And the federal government must respect the will of the voters in those states. I am a hardcore advocate of the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. I have consistently advocated for the federal government to respect the views of Wyoming in many areas, including our energy priorities, our environmental policy. I don't want other states telling us that certain economic activities should be verboten if they exist now, but other states or ESG policies disapprove of things like oil and gas and Second Amendment rights. So the main reason I support this legislation is because it takes a major step backwards, it takes a major step towards ending the banking industry being weaponized. It prevents the federal banking agencies for ordering the closure of bank accounts of persons and businesses for reputation risk reasons. Those are the terms that DC regulators and bureaucrats use to describe people and businesses they don't agree with ideologically, including firearms and energy companies in Wyoming. This legislation ensures Operation Choke Point, an illegal initiative led by the Obama administration to pressure banks to close accounts of industries they were ideologically opposed to, that can never threaten the people of Wyoming again. All legal businesses, whether on the right or the left side of the ideological spectrum, should have access to bank accounts. And this legislation ensures the federal government cannot pick winners and losers when it comes to providing everyone access to financial services. When I was elected to the Senate in 2020, I said I would be Wyoming all the time, all Wyoming, all the time. And I kept that promise to the people of Wyoming today, and I will never stop standing up for our Wyoming way of life here in the Senate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Lummis, and thank you for your work on this bill. Who asked for time? Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to thank you, a ranking member, and Senator Daines, and many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for moving this critically important Safer Banking Act through the Senate Banking Committee. It has been over 20 years since Nevada legalized cannabis for medical use, and 6 years since Nevadans voted to approve its recreational use as well. In fact, Nevada has the second highest sales of legal cannabis in the nation. There are so many Nevada business owners in our state who have opened cannabis businesses to create jobs and support their families. It's legal for them to do so. And yet too many of these business owners still can't use critical banking services that all other businesses can access. Operating as cash-only businesses is cumbersome and dangerous for them. I've heard from business owners who fear for their safety when carrying large amounts of cash to deposit at banks. I've talked to employees who struggle to open savings and checking accounts and even qualify for mortgages. And it doesn't have to be that way. Nevada voters legalized cannabis use years ago. There's no reason all these businesses shouldn't be able to access the banking system to keep themselves and their customers safe. I am glad that today, for the first time, the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee has passed the Safer Banking Act. I hope this is just the first step. I'd like to see Congress do more to help our small cannabis shops access more capital to expand their businesses. I also want to address some of the concerns that Senator Warnock brought forward, because I too have similar concerns. But let me also point out that in Nevada, when we legalized cannabis in 2017, we changed the way that our marijuana users were prosecuted. That change also included the possibility for expungement for past convictions. So Nevada state law addresses the very concerns that Senator Warnock is concerned about at a federal level. I respect his concerns about criminalization of cannabis users. We should continue to support funding for social services and substance abuse counseling. I know there is talk about rescheduling marijuana federally, but we can protect legal cannabis businesses now in those states that have made the decision to legalize them. It is important we continue to look out for their best interests as well. And so, Mr. Chairman, I thank you and the ranking member again. I thank everyone on this committee for their hard work. I would like to submit a letter for the record from the National Cannabis Roundtable, the National Cannabis Industry Association, the U.S. Cannabis Council and Minority Cannabis Business Association, and the National Hispanic Cannabis Council in support of this legislation as well. Thank you.
I thank the senator from Nevada, the senator from Arizona. Ms. Sunma is recognized.
Well, thank you, Chair Brown, and thank you to Senator Daines. Today is a really important step forward as the committee has considered and passed this bill. This bill will provide access to banking and insurance services for state legal cannabis businesses. This is important in my state because our bill also works to make banking less political and to ensure that Arizona businesses are treated fairly when they're applying for a bank account. In particular, I want to thank Senators Daines, Senator Lummis, and Senator Schumer. We've all worked tirelessly in a bipartisan working group to reconcile the differences and get this bill done, and I'm really proud of the work that we did together. You know, it shows that when we listen to each other and work in good faith to iron out differences, we can make things possible. I also want to extend my thanks to Chairman Brown and to Ranking Member Scott. Their leadership and expertise on this committee has helped make today possible, and I want to thank Senator Merkley for his years of leadership on this important issue. I'm really looking forward to working with members of both parties as we move this legislation to the floor, as we pass the Senate, and ultimately as we get it into law. So, thank you.
Thanks, Senator Sunma. Senator Merkley is recognized for wherever he wants to do this from. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on leading this committee on a complicated topic. It doesn't seem like it should be so complicated. To turn the clock back, it was 2012 when Colorado and Washington expanded to recreational cannabis, 2014 when the voters of Oregon did so, and immediately we started to see the cash economy create all kinds of problems. Cash economy is great if you're a criminal. It's great if you want to rob stores. In 12 months in Oregon, we had 153 robberies, basically one every other day because of the cash economy. The employees were mugged, leaving the stores because the possibility was that they might be carrying large sums of cash. So it was 2015 when I first introduced the predecessor of this bill and did so with Rand Paul. And so thank you to Rand Paul for joining on early in this journey. And then with Corey Gardner, who worked with me for years on this, and we testified before this committee together. And then with Senator Daines. So it's been a long journey. But thinking about that cash economy, it's not just the robberies, and it's not just the muggings. It's the fact that a cash economy is great for organized crime. There was some discussion here on the panel, on the committee, about the role of organized crime and fentanyl. Unbanked operations, operating in cash, is the easiest way to engage in all sorts of organized crime activities, including expanded activities in areas other than cannabis, like fentanyl. So if anything, this bill will help. The second big objective of this bill was to say that banking regulators shouldn't be moral police, that they shouldn't be deciding that legal businesses should be unbanked because they simply don't like the business that they're in. And this bill sends a powerful message in that regard. And the third role of this bill was to start the journey of trying to address some of the damage done by the unequal enforcement of cannabis laws over time. This bill proceeds to say that minority depository institutions will fully be able to serve cannabis retailers and contractors, that community development financial institutions will be able to serve them, CDFIs. This bill says that legal cannabis income will be allowable for people to be able to get federally backed mortgages, which often they have been discriminated against. This bill starts, and I want to point out the provision under Section 12, creates a GAO study on barriers to marketplace entry and looks specifically at the impact on minority-owned, veteran-owned, women-owned, small state-sanctioned marijuana businesses and hemp-related legitimate businesses in order to understand the impact of this bill and hopefully to sustain small business participation, minority participation, women participation. I do have concerns about the consolidation of this business, as with many others, and hope we can do everything possible to keep small businesses engaged. So 3 core goals. It was in 2020 that Michael Arthur, who was working at Cured Green in North Portland, was killed in a robbery. None of these robberies had to happen if we weren't in a cash world. And it's not just Oregon, it's happening in every state that has the cash economy. And of course, the muggings of employees, sometimes resulting in severe injury, and in this case, resulting in a death. But individuals like Michael Arthur will not be attacked leaving the store because of the presumption that they're carrying large amounts of cash. So 3 very good steps forward. I must say I strongly support, on the floor of the Senate, adding Hope and adding Graham. That is to say that we will do federal grants for expungement, helping to address the issues that Senator Warnock is raising regarding Georgia. Our state of Oregon has moved for expungement significantly under previous Governor Brown, but I'd like to see all states try to remedy the inequitable administration of cannabis laws in the past. And I also support the Graham amendment, which says that if you are a cannabis user, yet cannot be a basis for denying your Second Amendment rights to own a firearm. So, step forward in 3 fronts. It's been simple objectives, very complicated to get there. I look forward to this going forward, but it would never be able to go forward if it didn't have your support and working many details to get the nuances ironed out in this fashion. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Daines. Thank you to the committee.
Senator Merkley, thank you, and thanks for your thoughtful comments and our discussions for years. I would point out this bill actually started many years ago with a Republican congressman from Ohio, from Columbus, and with a Democratic congressman from Colorado as his partner, and Senator Merkley has been leading in the Senate for half a decade on this, so thank you. The executive session is concluded.